They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds. I'm not a schemer. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. And here we go.
Well, hello there. How is everyone? You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. I hope you are all well on this terrific Tuesday. You're looking amazing. I'm going to get straight into the meat and potatoes as we've got some bits and pieces to go over today. As in video 2, I will be going over the Steve Gonsalves interview that he did over on This Morning, a UK morning chat show. But in this video, we're just going to quickly touch on media again, because check this out. Load of garbage, innit? Load of bloody garbage. Bryan Kohberger, prosecutor, addresses motive for Idaho murders. And I'm thinking, did he? I'm thinking to myself, I need to get hold of this. He's talking about motive. He's addressing the motive. The prosecution laid out its evidence against Bryan Kohberger after he pleaded guilty to murdering 4 Idaho college students in 2022 in order to avoid trial and possibility of the death penalty, death sentence. Which, again, I think that there is some truth in that. Definitely some truth in that. The questions as to why Bryan Kohberger killed 4 Idaho college students remained unanswered. The 30-year-old pleaded guilty July 2nd to willfully and deliberately murdering roommates Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Knodel, as well as Knodel's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, on 13th of November 2022. Less than 2 months before he was scheduled to go to trial, Kohberger agreed to a plea deal that will send him to prison for the rest of his life in exchange for avoiding the possibility of a death sentence. After Kohberger's confession, according to People, Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson detailed the evidence the state would have presented should the case have gone to trial, which was the same fucking garbage bullshit that we've seen in the PCA that he himself had deemed irrelevant and outdated. And, you know, he's basically turned around and said, but hold on, let's go through this and then we'll stick a pin in it before I go off on a tangent. Thompson said cell tower records showed that from July 9th, 2022 to November 7th, 2022, Kohberger's phone pinged a tower near the off-campus house where victims were killed 23 times. You could wear that, you know, when it's too early and you think they were killed 23 times. No, but what he's saying is it was pinged off a tower that provided service to an area up to within 100 meters of this property. And this is important because in the next sentence, look, the signals were registered between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. And again, you can't forget that Bryan Kohberger could have been sitting at home and this could have been the scenario, to ping off this tower that provided coverage to an area within 100 meters of this house. You've got to understand that he could have been at home and that scenario existed. I'm not saying he was 100%. I'm saying he could have been. Thompson could not say what Kohberger did during that time or if he had contact with any of the 4 victims before breaking into the house and stabbing them to death. Rather, the prosecutor said his office could not connect Kohberger to the victims and therefore did not offer a theory on the motive for the quadruple murder. It says, we do not have evidence that he had direct contact with the home. So we do not have evidence that he had direct contact with the home. That's literally what they're writing, Thompson said in court, per People. But we can put his phone in that area at those times. Can you, though? Because you would say that he switched his phone off, which meant that you couldn't put his phone in those areas. He can just be on a tower, connected to a tower that provides service up to within 100 meters of the house. While Ann Taylor simultaneously said, but you know what he was doing. And there was an example of this specific situation in the plea deal hearing where Bill Thompson, and I'll speak about this again later, literally lies and says that he doesn't know what Bryan Kohberger was doing in the area on the morning of these murders in the aftermath of. When it was very clear that Bryan Kohberger went there to go to an ATM, he was caught on the ATM camera and would then leave, which would account for the 10 minutes that he is, in this area. But Thompson makes it sound like he doesn't know what he was doing and makes it seem like there's this macabre leave you to fill in the blanks. The prosecutor also said, per the Idaho Statesman, that the state would not represent that Kohberger intended to commit all of the murders that he did that night, but we know that is what resulted. It says, moreover, Thompson continued, there was no speculation nor evidence that any of the victims had been, you can see it on the screen, assaulted in any way. A key piece of evidence for the prosecution, however, was a KBAR knife sheath that was found under one of the victims. Investigators were able to link Kohberger to the crime scene through single-source DNA found on the sheath. Again, we don't go into the full convoluted story. We keep it short, we keep it sweet, we keep it simple. Thompson noted that while the sheath proved key in finding Kohberger, a doctoral candidate in criminal justice at Washington State University at the time of his arrest, the knife itself was never recovered. And it seems that they have no fucking interest in finding out where it is either, because you would think if they did, they would just simply ask Bryan, if you're the person who did it, can you tell us what you did with the knife, please? Now, maybe that information will come out later and we will find that that was asked, and indeed he did give an answer, and hopefully bring some closure to that little chapter there. Thompson also mentioned, per the Statesman, that Kohberger's 2015 white Hyundai Elantra appeared to have been thoroughly cleaned when the suspect was taken into custody. The prosecutor said that the car, matching the description of his vehicles caught on video surveillance near the crime scene at around 3:30 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. The car was seen circling the area multiple times. And what I'll just say about the car cleaning as well, now, it would appear that Bryan cleaned the car when he got back to Pennsylvania. That seems to be the thing. So after this massive, long, cross-country drive with his dad that was pre-planned, he decides to get home and thoroughly clean his car. He's been at school, he's been at work, he's done this cross-country drive. What best time to clean your car, but when you get home, when you've done it all, ready to go back to school with a nice fucking fresh, clean car? I don't get it. Are we saying that because he cleans his car, that after all of this, that's indication that he is a killer? If he was a killer, you could argue that he would have been bleaching the car and making sure that the car was sorted in the days after. Imagine he thinks, fuck, I've left the knife sheath at the property. He's got to be aware that if he's the person who did it, he'd done that. So he's thinking to himself, fuck, I've left something that could potentially have my DNA on it, because he couldn't have been wearing gloves while he was handling it. And bearing in mind that he is someone who is, you would hope that he understands about DNA, for instance. You would think he'd clean his car immediately. You would think he would potentially get rid of his fucking car. Do you know what I mean? But no, he apparently doesn't do anything with it until weeks and weeks later. It just doesn't make sense to me, but there we go. The car was seen circling the area multiple times, making sure to get caught on as many cameras as possible, Thompson said, and then zoomed away from King Road at a high rate of speed, almost losing control at 4:20 a.m. The defendant has studied crime, Thompson told the court. The People, in fact, he did a detailed paper on crime scene processing when he was working on his PhD, and he had the knowledge skill set. Kohberger's sentencing hearing is scheduled for July 23rd. Read on for more details about the Idaho college student murders, which this is just stuff that we already know. So there isn't really a motive given. They don't know what or why or how or anything. They don't know where the knife sheath, where the knife is, the murder weapon. There seems to be no connection between Bryan Kohberger or the victims. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that connects Bryan Kohberger to the property or has him physically at the property at any point whatsoever. So all they can do is speculate that this might have happened, that might have happened. Yet Bryan Kohberger has indeed plead guilty. And for those of you who keep saying,
well, if this car belongs to someone else, why haven't they just come forward and said, look, it's me, it's my car?
Because it still could be somebody else who fucking did it. Why is somebody else going to come forward and say,
that car that you think is Bryan Kohberger's, and that's one of the reasons why he's fucked, by the way, that's actually my car?
Because they could have been involved. You fucking numpties. Ah, my word. Use your brain. What is wrong with people? Why can't they think critically?
Why wouldn't somebody come forward and say that that's actually my car on camera?
Duh, because they could potentially be the killer and they're watching this motherfucker getting railroaded. Love you all. Mwah.